Thanks for tuning into Dirty Teeth and welcome back to the channel. No, I assure you the title is not clickbait. Last weekend, I was blessed with the chance to push and ride my fat bike around for over 22 hours straight on JP's 200K Fat Pursuit. The temps after sunset quickly dipped well below zero. By about 9 or 10 o'clock, the temps were about negative 20 to 25 degrees. In the wee hours, it hit negative 30 and continued dropping all the way down to negative 45 degrees Fahrenheit around 4 to 6 a.m. as I tootled near the Snake River. For those of you expecting a recap video, sorry, this isn't it, but I am working on it. I decided to include some perspective from 3 other riders, as well as Jay, the race director, and I'm hoping to tell that story next week. In the meantime, I'm going to explore what suffered in the extreme cold and what held up better than you might expect. I'm talking about kit and gear, clothing, and fueling and hydration strategies. A bunch of you submitted thoughtful questions, thank you very much, so I'll dive into some of those here as well. And whatever I don't address now will be answered in the next video. Let's start with my fat bike, which is my trusty titanium big iron named Sylvester. Sly did great, no mechanicals. The build is pretty much the same as I used on Iditarod. So if you're curious, you can watch that bike check. I also did a first impressions video and did a long-term review. If you want to go full geek mode, I'll put those links down below as well. Someone asked, how low is too low a temp for a bike, or when will a bike fail? And my answer is luckily, I don't know. Sly was flawless, and I know other folks that have ridden down well below negative 50 degrees without welds cracking or frames breaking or any of that, so that's about all I can say. Another question was about bearing failure and frozen grease. I've never heard of bearings themselves failing. But yes, thickening grease at low temps can be an issue. Kluber Isoflex and Mag 1 are a couple popular options with the Iditarod crowd. During the race, Kurt's bottom bracket started giving him issues, making it hard to pedal, and he has Arctic grease in his bearings. He thinks the problem was actually with the cartridge bearing seals, and it contributed to his decision to scratch. It's probably most important to ditch the stock grease in your free hub shell. I replaced mine with a thin layer of slick honey, and you can also use Dumont free hub oil. Both of these have extremely low freezing points. My shifter got sluggish, and Logan told me he had the exact same problem. But functionally, it worked just fine and the bike still shifted. In hindsight, I should have flushed the grease and put some slick honey in there. I use a trigger shifter because it works well with my grips, but I've always considered swapping to a grip shifter. This might have just pushed me over the edge. My right thumb was legitimately fatigued. Is there a special chain lube that won't freeze your derailleur? I had 0 issues on Fat Pursuit or the Iditarod. I use SCC Slick or Wolftooth WT1, they're identical. The chain was quiet and smooth the whole ride. What is your tire choice and size? I went with Bontrager Barbagazzi 27.5 by 4.5 inch tires. They're about as high volume as you can get for 27.5. They're relatively light and have very low rolling resistance. And made it to my head alloy wheels, they never burped or leaked air once. The rubber itself never hardened up, and they always stayed supple. Although for the soft, sloppy snow that was super prevalent during this race, wider is always better. The folks with 100mm rims and 5-inch tires were definitely faring better than myself. I dealt with this on the Iditarod too, watching my buddy Perry just steamroll over stuff that I was having a lot of trouble with. Then again, he's just a much better rider than I am, so there's also that. What tire pressure were you running? I went by feel and was probably between 6 and 2 psi most of the time. And I'm sure I got all the way down to 1 when the temps really dipped. Until then, I'd just been letting air out little by little, but at around negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit, I finally had to add a bunch of air. Tire pressure is always critical, especially with big temperature fluctuations. The high during the day was 19 degrees Fahrenheit, so we're talking about a whopping swing of like 60 to 65 degrees. As temps drop, air molecules tend to huddle together, taking up less space inside the tire, thus causing pressure to drop. This is why we never trust tire pressure readings inside our comfy warm hotel rooms and have to take our bikes outside to acclimate to the cold weather before adjusting tire pressures. I've heard of a couple different formulas and even done some tests myself. The specifics don't really matter, just know that once you get below 0, to expect a sharp decline in tire pressure. Probably somewhere around 1 or maybe even 2 psi for every 10 or so degrees of temperature drop. So if you're at say 6 psi at 10 degrees, don't be surprised if you're at full crinkle mode by the time the temperatures reach -20. This leads me to my pump. I've been using a Leisine high volume micro floor pump forever. Some folks absolutely hate thread-on pumps because they can tend to remove your valve core when you take them off. In my next video, you'll meet somebody that this happened to at Fat Pursuit, leading him to scratch. I've never had an issue because I always make sure my valve cores are tight and I never thread on my pump too tight, just enough for it to engage. But I've also been using this quickie push-on adapter for a while. This makes it so I don't have to thread the pump on at all. Well, at -40 degrees, this little plastic piece failed me. It would not make a seal with the valve stem. So I took it off and threaded my pump on with no problems after that. When you're doing this type of work with just liner gloves on or naked hands, you really have to be careful. I always have chemical hand warmers, cracked and firing, and sitting in my pogies ready for these scenarios. This way I can have dexterity with my hands with a liner glove or even barehanded for a little bit, then I can get them right back into the heat and up to temp without my fingers freezing. Did you keep all your extremities warm enough? Yes, I did. I never got cold. At -45 degrees, my elbows and upper forearms did start to get a little chilly. I chose not to bring my alpaca arm warmers on this ride, so maybe next time I would, but it wasn't that big of a deal. What boots and setup did you use for your feet? I made a YouTube short detailing my setup, and I also mentioned it in my cold feet video. So I'll link to those and won't bore you with it now, but my feet were good the whole time. Did you layer up or down a lot? Not much. I slowly added layers as the night went on and temps dropped, but I always had at least one chest move to go. Yeah, once it really started getting cold, it never warmed up enough to warrant shedding layers, although I really wish it did. I'm very happy to say that all of the layering and systems I keep preaching about in my cold feet, cold hands, cold core, cold face videos all held up very well. Although I did have a couple minor personal fails. I chose not to bust out a full-on face and nose mask, which was fine. My breathing in the cold dry air was never an issue. But I did get some icicles dangling from my lips. I didn't think too much about it and never tended to it because it wasn't bugging me. In hindsight, I should have cleared them off right away and reapplied Dermatone. Since the race, I've noticed my lips are a little bit chapped and swollen. There's no real pain and they are healing up pretty quickly, but I should have listened to my own advice when it comes to self-care. Do it now. This means stay on top of everything. I just want to hammer this home right out of the gate. Also, my photochromic glasses failed and I had no clue. I basically wore sunglasses the whole night. It wasn't until I saw a couple pictures of myself later on that I realized it. I knew photochromic lenses get darkest in colder weather and take longer to revert to clear. I don't know at what temperature it actually happened, but they were on permatint all night. I never once took my glasses off to realize it because my face wasn't that cold. But after the fact, I would have been way better off switching to my amber goggles. Anywho, all I can say is my lights must have been pretty dang good for me to never notice. Speaking of, the next question, how did you manage electronics, lights, and batteries in those temperatures? I used a Phoenix BC30 handlebar light and a Princeton Apex headlamp. Both take disposable CR123A lithium-ion batteries. This makes it easy for carrying spares, and they fare fantastically in cold weather. I had zero issues, never had to replace any batteries, and both burned well all through the night. The BC30 has a wireless controller, which stays nice and warm inside my Pogi. I also used this exact same setup on the Iditarod. Logan was using an exposure light, and you may know I normally love exposure lights. His said 18 hours left, and then it just dropped dead. Ryan also had his lights drop dead, so yeah, it was definitely a thing. What did you use for navigation, and was it reliable? I used the Garmin Edge 540 mounted out in the elements purely as a test because I was curious about its limitations. I also had Gaia on my phone, which stayed warm in my pocket as a backup. And I'm familiar with the course, so I was never too worried. I almost forgot to mention I also carried a paper map just in case. Anyway, surprising as it may be, the 540 was great. It kept me on track the whole time, and the navigation and stats never glitched. The reminder to drink always went off, and the thermometer was very accurate compared to my analog one. Once the battery dropped to 50%, it stopped calculating battery life on the display, so I kept waiting for it to die. But crazy enough, after 22 hours, it was still alive. I plugged it into my cache battery for the last hour just to see if it would take a charge, and it was great. I also had it hooked up to my heart rate monitor, and that had no issues either. I had never used a heart rate strap on anything like this before, but I was glad I did. Of course, it's different for everybody, but I kept my heart rate between 130 and 140 beats per minute for pretty much the whole time and minimized the crazy spikes. It really helped me control my exertion and sweat management. As long as I was roughly under 140, I could easily keep dry. And when I got to around 145, I could start to feel the moisture build up. So this way, I pretty much figured out my moisture threshold, which was pretty cool. I should mention my cache battery, which is a night core that I've raved about before. It's not even the one that's designed to keep itself warm in frigid temps. It lived in this little sunglass pouch in my feed bag. Normally I'd have it in a pocket on my body, but I was curious how it would do exposed to the elements all night. It had all 3 lights showing full juice, and it charged my Garmin no problem. 2 thumbs up, and I highly recommend it. For tracking duties, I use this Spot Tracker Gen 3. Tracking is always glitchy, regardless of temps, depending on line of sight to the sky, signal strength, and all that. But this was fine and never had any issues in the cold. The rental spots were trace models and did fine as well. On the Iditarod, they supply spot traces as mandatory to everyone. So they've been heavily tested and put through the ringer in these environments. I did hear about plenty of electronics fails through a few friends. A buddy of mine on the 60K had his Garmin InReach completely shut off. Mind you, it was about -22 at the start of the 60 race. Logan's InReach showed a critical temp warning and then died as well. I heard Kurt even had issues with his E-Trex, which is usually the gold standard in cold weather. I heard from multiple folks using Garmin 1040s that they also just shut down on them. Another friend of mine doing the 60K said his Wahoo Element wouldn't even turn on. Eden used a 1040, but kept it in his pocket most of the time, except to check it once in a while, and it worked fine. The moral of the story, I have no clue how my 540 hung in there, but in the future, with these temps, I still wouldn't trust it. Your best bet is to put electronics in pockets or pogies and get hand warmers on them if you want them to work. And one more quick note, none of these functionality issues were permanent. Once back up to a more appropriate temp, everything worked as normal again. So there you go. Did the frigid temps keep you from exercising your fueling plan? It made it harder, and I had to be a little more disciplined, but no, I was still able to execute. I could easily make a whole video about this, but in a nutshell, I used powdered drink mix to get most of my carbs and electrolyte replacement. And my snacks were basically chocolate-covered nuts, pumpkin seeds, and bacon. These won't freeze and shatter my teeth, and they've got a lot of fat. I also relied on SIS isotonic gels, which I tested ahead of time and kept in a pocket. They never froze, and they helped me a lot, especially deep into the night when I was struggling to find motivation to eat. They go down super easy, and a few of them have big caffeine kicks as well. In terms of hydration, I carried a 3-liter bladder and a 32-ounce thermos. Early in the race, I could feel my hose and nozzle starting to slush up when it was 5 degrees and I only had 1 layer on top of it. I had an alarm set to drink every 15 minutes. Down at -45 with 4 layers on, my hose and nozzle never came close to freezing. Although I'd stop to sip every 5 to 10 minutes because I was paranoid. So obviously the extra insulation makes a huge difference. What was your sleep kit pad in particular, and did you actually sleep? I carried a -25-degree Western Mountaineering Puma sleeping bag. Then I had an ultralight Montbell bivy and 2 very thin foam pads. I did not set up a bivy and I did not sleep. My goal on this ride was to go fast for me and to ride through the night, and so I did. But I knew I'd be okay in an emergency because it's a great sleeping bag. I also threw in an Expedition puffy jacket at the last minute for some added peace of mind. I never came close to busting it out, but I was super glad to have that chest move just in case. Regarding pads, I have had issues with inflatable mattresses in the past in super cold temps. I personally don't recommend them for rides like this. I believe Cody had issues with his valve freezing up while inflating his, and I've heard similar stories from others. In my opinion, closed cell foam is the way to go. How did you attach the Downtube stuff and what was in it? That reminds me, I want to talk about straps for a second. I used rock straps to attach my sleep kit and they were great. I used Volet ski straps in Alaska and they were great. This time I tried a tail fin ski strap on one of my Downtube bags and had issues. In the cold weather, it became super stiff and lost all of its elasticity, which was really annoying. Like I said, I've used Volet straps and I've also used Titan straps in super cold temps before. They're not as flexible as they are in normal temps, but I don't remember them being as rigid as the tail fin strap. So yeah, totally awesome in normal temps, but I'd steer clear in ultra cold ultras. Ultra. As for what was in my Downtube bag, luckily it was stuff I never needed to use and I never had to open the bag after the mandatory water boil test. And that's how I like it. A spare tube, my spares and repairs kit, Gore-Tex pants, a Gore-Tex jacket, some thin mittens, rubber gloves, my pot, my stove, and some fuel. I also had a second Downtube bag. This had my thermos in it, filled with hot water and Tailwind apple cider. Yum. Were the preparatory training gains noticeable during the event? I recently posted a video about starting structured training and buying an indoor trainer, wanting to go faster and really test myself and all that stuff. If you're curious, I'll link to that video below, and I'm pretty sure that's what this question's getting at. The short answer is yes. I felt fitter and more invigorated the whole ride, and I think following a structured training plan helped a bunch. This was kind of a weird year for Fat Pursuit because of the extremely cold weather and the very slow going. Out of something like 76 starters, pretty much all of us pulled the plug at some point this year, except for 3 bikers, 1 skier, and 1 walker. My next video will dive more into that, but heading into aid station 2 at mile 78, I was somehow in 5th place, and one of only like 8 or 9 people total to make it to CP2 after riding through the night without bivvying. I'm a full-on mid-pack dude normally, and there's no way I would have had the endurance to push through the night and only be a couple hours behind guys like Kurt Refsnyder and Jacob Ora and Logan Casper and Ryan without feeling pretty good physically. But yeah, 100% structured indoor training has been helping me a bunch. I just took my second FTP test and I'll be making a video on the progress soon. So that's it for now. Thanks again for all the questions. And again, anything I haven't addressed should be tackled in the next video. So if you're not subscribed, please consider jumping on board and help me reach my goal of 16,000 subscribers by the end of the month. Also, if there's any more questions or you want to add your 2 cents, please chime in the comments down below. Don't forget to share this video, hit the like button and all that jazz if you enjoyed it. And until next time, ride bikes, give back, pay it forward. Thanks so much for squeezing dirty teeth into your busy schedule. Please help us reach more people and ensure you receive new videos by giving this video a like, subscribing to the channel, and clicking the notification bell. Until next time, ride bikes, give back, pay it forward.